Democrats now, so here's your chance.
We're live.
Okay, great. Looks like we have a quorum and we are live. So I'll start off just saying good morning, everyone. It seems like we were just together a few short hours ago. I want to say, just before we start off today's work session, just thank you and how appreciative I think all of us are just of your hard work on this issue. Obviously, it's we've got a wide berth of things that we're dealing with, from independent investigations all the way through to the reimagining or reworking the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. And so these issues are not absence of controversy, as you know, and this is really, really all important work. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for the hours that you've poured into this so far. I know that it gets frustrating, and I know that it is arduous, but I just want to say just thank you for sticking with this process. So last night we ended off with a couple of amendments, and we were working on Senator Carter's bill for a disciplinary process, an administrative disciplinary process for law enforcement officers. So we're going to table that discussion while amendments are being finalized, and while cooler heads will have an opportunity to prevail on those issues. And so today we're going to focus in on two other pieces of the package, which we've seen not only this past fall, but then also we had hearings on independent investigations and MPIA, so access to disciplinary records for law enforcement officers. So we're going to discuss those two bills today, and that'll provide opportunities for people to think of amendments to draft up. We can maybe answer some questions, dive a little deeper, and then when we come to a voting session, we'll be, I think, more well equipped to make some progress on the two bills before you today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to counsel, to Jamie Lancaster, and we can start off with MPIA and Senator Carter's bill. So if you want to just kind of give us a very brief and succinct overview of the bill, and then we can walk through Senator Carter if you'd like to say something about your bill and the necessity for it. And then we can just open it up for discussion, entertain amendments, get them drafted, and just as we've done before, have a productive work session. I also want to say thank you to special thanks to our Republican members. I think you all had a scheduling conflict in a caucus, so I just want to say thank you for your attendance here and your dedication to the committee product and work process. I know that we're all juggling multiple things, and just want to say special thank you to you all for being here today. So with that, Jamie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is Senate Bill 178 relating to the Public Information Act. A couple of important things to note, or one important thing to note at the outset, is that generally under MPIA, a custodian of records is required to deny inspection of a personnel record of an individual. What Senate Bill 178 does, and this is at the bottom of page 2, is provides that a record relating to an administrative or criminal investigation of misconduct by a law enforcement officer, including an internal affairs investigatory record, a hearing record, and records relating to a disciplinary decision, are not personnel records for the purposes of that section. Further into the bill, this is on page 3, it provides that a custodian may deny inspection of records relating to an administrative or criminal investigation of misconduct by a law enforcement officer, including an internal affairs investigatory record, a hearing record, and records relating to a disciplinary decision. So and I think in the bill hearings, this has been said before, it takes it from a shall deny to a may deny. So if there's some other reason under the MPIA that the record should be denied, the custodian would be looking to those and determining whether it fit into that category, and whether it was in the public interest to disclose it or not.
Hey, Jamie, hold on one second. I'm having a audio problem here, so I can't hear anything. Just 1 second here. All right, over to Senator Carter. Do you want to speak to the necessity of the bill or any comments? I'll ask here you go. There you go.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and JPR committee members. I appreciate the hard work that we're all doing on these important issues. So the reason for this bill is because law enforcement agencies data reveals that the overwhelming majority of complaints that are received by the agencies are in the category of unsustained or unfounded. Throughout the state of Maryland, different agencies categorize complaints differently, and there's different terminology for that. But basically, the category of complaints that falls into the sustained pile is between, I think, 2.2 and 2.6 of all complaints in some agencies. I'm not speaking to every single agency in the state, but some of the larger jurisdictions notably have very few complaints or allegations that are ever sustained. When the Department of Justice conducted its study of Baltimore Police Department that resulted in a consent decree, they attributed so much of the ongoing corruption and unconstitutional activity to the fact that the internal investigations process was broken and that investigations were poor and sometimes not even conducted, and that so many of the cases or allegations of excessive force and other misconduct, including disorderly conduct or were not sustained. And so we've had, I'm focusing on that aspect of this bill because there's been discussion about, well, why on earth should we allow the disclosure of complaints that are not sustained? And my argument is because that is where all of the devil lies, all of the bad stuff lies. If we only focus on sustained complaints, we really won't get to the meat of what is going on with these internal processes. And I think it's important for us to do as we move forward as a state. For those very concerned about what the implications of this might be, I would point to the fact that other states do it, have done it, the number of states that is doing it is growing, and there are no reported tragedies. For those that are very concerned about this mythological aspect of potential harm coming to officers whose information is disclosed, I would simply point to the fact that there's been no notable case. There are some situations where we actually know the names of officers because cases were made public, and even where their cases were unsustained criminally and administratively. And there's been no harm. There's been no major retaliation from the citizenry against these officers. And so I don't think that that is a meritorious reason not to go further with this bill. I'm looking forward to the work group, and I'm hoping at the end of the day, we come out of it with transparency that will help us lead to the accountability that we need.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Carter. I'll open up to the committee for further comments. Senator Castley, and then we can go into the merits of the bill.
I just a couple of questions real quick for just make sure understand. The first one's just for Jamie, I guess, really. You're on there somewhere, aren't you? Oh, there you are over there. Okay. So this is under the an amendment to the Public Information Act, right?
That's correct.
So these records make me clear. So if there was a criminal prosecution, the current law doesn't restrict the prosecutor's ability to obtain all of these records already, right?
I'm not sure about in the context of a prosecutor. There had been testimony that was given in different contexts. I believe before the Commission to Restore Trust in Policing, one hearing where attorneys on at least the defense side had indicated that obtaining the records, there were obstacles, or the PIA was presenting them with obstacles in doing that.
So you're saying if Officer Jones is being investigated by the state's attorney in whatever county that is, and the state's attorney thinks that is investigating Officer Jones for potential civil rights violations or violation of criminal law, that the PIA, the Public Information Act, would in any way inhibit the state's attorney's ability to have a subpoena issued or a grand jury subpoena issued for Officer Jones' records, that the Public Information Act?
No, I'm not gonna speak for the state attorneys on that one. I haven't specifically heard that the state's attorneys were having that issue, but somewhere in the process there seems to have been an issue, or at least that's what's been reported. I can look into it and find out from the state's attorneys if they're having an issue with actually obtaining the disciplinary records.
And what about in civil litigation? If you sue a police officer or the municipality for civil rights violations, does this in any way inhibit the ability of the federal court or the state court to direct disclosure of records under a subpoena?
Again, as far as the ability of a subpoena to get those records, I think I'd feel more comfortable getting that answer to you later.
Okay, and then so we do know that this affects, if I'm just Joe Public and I just want to find out about Officer Jones, and for whatever reason I might have, this would affect me to just say, hey, I'm going to file a Public Information Act request, everything on Officer Jones. I want to know his full file. This would impact that request, right?
It would. So generally the Public Information Act, and it's actually part of the bill that's not shown, or part of the law that's not shown in the bill, is 4343 of the General Provisions article. And it sets out a standard generally for custodians of record. And it says, unless otherwise provided by law, if a custodian believes that inspection of a part of a public record by the applicant would be contrary to the public interest, the custodian may deny inspection by the applicant of that part of the record as provided in this part. And then the applicable provision to this bill that relates to that is what you see in the bill. So the idea would be is that the custodian would need to make a determination essentially as to whether it was contrary to the public interest to disclose that record.
So currently under the law, if it's in the personnel file, per se, boom, nobody can see it. Or Public Information Act. Me, Joe Citizen, not a prosecutor. I don't have a lawsuit. Me, Joe Citizen. If there's something in the personnel file, I just can't get it. Correct? It's just sort of this.
Right. There's a
lockbox.
It's blocked out as being a personnel record because MPIA specifically designates personnel records as non-disclosable.
Okay. So I guess that I'm just trying to think maybe that could be subject to abuse because you can pretty much just put everything in the personnel folder and then not disclose anything, I guess is how that's being looked at. Is that a fair statement of where the risk of doing that? Is that right?
You know, there may be case law that that might address that issue. I'm not 100% sure, but I think the question was whether you could use that provision of MPIA to sort of circumvent disclosure by putting information that somebody didn't want disclosed into the personnel
Just
record.
hide it there. Right. So now if we adopt this change, then we stop with the per se. We're going to hold on. Just because it's in the personnel folder, now I have a PII request. So now I'm the guy who the department's person who processes PII request, then I would have, or PIA request, excuse me, I would have to take that personnel file, put it on my desk, and actually, now, before I could just say, hey, it was a personnel file, you can't have it. Now I actually have to take that personnel file, put it on my desk, open it up, and start going through it and say, this you can't have, this has got a social security number on it, it's about his heart condition, you can't have that. This is stuff that you can have, it does meet the statute, right? That's kind of where we're going with this change.
So if, right, so for in social security numbers, addresses, things like that, there are provisions of MPIA that relate to non-disclosure of those things. And they've been specifically designated by the legislature as non-disclosable. But in the context of records of the administrative or criminal investigation of misconduct, and it specifically includes, and this is an illustrative list, internal affairs, investigatory records, hearing records, records relating to a disciplinary decision, those would be excluded from the personnel file, or at least in the context of disclosure. You know, they are not considered to be part of that non-disclosable part of the personnel record.
Under this bill, if we change it,
Right.
That's what.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
Right. And so now we've got a proposed amendment by the chiefs and sheriffs. I think that, and that would just, the essence of that amendment would be to further break that down and say certain administrative investigations would be automatic per se disclosable, and another category would not be per se disclosable. Isn't that what that amendment does?
Are you referring to the amendment? I think it takes it back to the bill that was introduced last year, essentially, right?
Yeah, I think you're right. It is the bill introduced last year. Yeah. I mean, that's the current amendment that they would propose this year, was to basically say, now we're gonna, instead of having all these administrative investigations per se disclosable, we're gonna now look at that and say some of those would be and some of them wouldn't be.
Right. So, I mean, I can give a little bit of specificity on that proposed amendment if you'd like.
If it's okay with the chairman, I think it sort of lays out where we are with all of this, what the discussion is.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. And then, yeah, go ahead.
So what that amendment would do is it would say that it would strike out the language providing for the exclusion from the personnel records as it's currently drafted in the bill, and it would instead say a record relating to a formal complaint of job-related misconduct made against a law enforcement officer, including the internal record, the investigation record, a hearing record, or a disciplinary decision, is not a personnel record if the qualifier is one, the alleged misconduct involves the discharge of a firearm at a person by a law enforcement officer. Two, the alleged misconduct involves the use of force by a law enforcement officer resulting in death or serious bodily injury. Three, a sustained, so these would need to have been sustained, investigatory finding was made by a law enforcement agency that a law enforcement officer committed either sexual assault involving a member of the public or any of the following acts if the act is directly related to reporting, investigating, or prosecuting a crime. And those acts would be, this is in the sustained category, that the officer engaged in dishonesty, committed perjury, made false statements, filed false reports, or destroyed or falsified or concealed evidence, or engaged in prohibited discrimination. So that would, those records would be excluded from the personnel file.
So on the unsustained, if it's use of a firearm or bodily injury, if it's sustained or unsustained, we can discover it. If it's not sustained, then we can, I'm sorry, and then if it's sustained, then we expand the categories, right? So that's what they're doing. They allow some things to be disclosed if they're unsustained and certain things to be disclosed only if they're sustained, right?
So just to, I guess I'll sort of rephrase it a little bit. In the context of the discharge of a firearm at a person, or in the context of use of force by the officer resulting in death or serious bodily injury, with the chiefs and sheriffs, what they've asked for in their testimony was that regardless of whether or not it was sustained, those records would be not included in the personnel record. But then,
Which means they would be disclosable.
Allegations of sexual assault or the acts that I described about engaging in dishonesty, perjury, et cetera, those would require a sustained finding to be excluded from the personnel record.
Okay, all right. And then just really quickly to a question to Senator Carter. So I'm concerned that your standard, you say, look, there's no evidence that this change would result in tragedies or retaliatory actions. But is that really our only standard? Because shouldn't we also be concerned that these changes might just discourage people from wanting to be a law enforcement officer, or good law enforcement officers just to say, I'm out of here? I mean, do we have to reach the level that this is bad public policy in order to come to that conclusion? Does it have to be a tragedy? Does somebody have to be killed or maimed or attacked on the street? Or can we say that, well, it doesn't have to be quite that bad for us to say it's not a good public policy, that maybe just that it would just be an unwarranted intrusion upon people's lives that might discourage us from recruiting and retaining good officers? Would that be enough? She's muted.
Let me unmute her.
Thanks, Senator Casserly. So in answer to your question, I actually believe, and I've stated before, that I think that more transparency will actually encourage good people to be police officers. Those officers that have integrity will be more comfortable and more confident in their profession, and the ability for the bad apples that we say are few to be weeded out. So I actually do not see this as a deterrent to policing. I see it as something that will elevate the profession and encourage people that truly want to give service in a non-abusive way to want to do it. The only reason I brought up that concept of retaliation is because that's what the opponents of the bill focused on, this, and not just this bill, but several bills like this. I would say unwarranted fear that it will result in some type of retaliation against officers. I don't think that there's evidence of that, or it being like, to a level that it's to be a deterrent for passing the bill. And finally, even though you didn't ask this specifically, I would just reiterate something that has been said many times. This is not, a free-for-all or a database. This is still where a custodian of records has discretion, and now these records that are currently prohibited are in the category of permissible. There's still criteria that's reached, and I don't think that it's something that is just going to be, an explosion of records that are being disclosed. And
you don't see that certain groups would issue 5,000 PIA requests for every officer in a given department for the last 5 years, and then comb those and then come up with and then release everything they could possibly release that in any way was suggestive about officers, and then those would be published in the newspaper about all the unfounded allegations, and then young officers would look at that and say, I'm out of here, or future officers would say, who wants to be a part of this crap? Seems to me
I don't see that, and I'll tell you why. Because to my understanding, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, even though when there's a Public Information Act request, even for those records that are disclosable, the government still has a right to charge for the copying and, the collecting of this data that they release. And so, no, I don't think so, because that would be potentially super expensive for any group or person to do, to ask for, just a plethora of records. Also, I want to make it clear that under current law, the unsustained complaints are expungible. And so it's not really possible for someone to go back like 5 years or 10 years, because there would be no records of those under current law. So I don't think so. And this bill is prospective, meaning that it wouldn't allow for someone to be able to go back to records that are already dispensed with.
Does your bill change the expungement date at all?
It does not.
So could a department say, we'll expunge these? Could a given department say, if you're unsustained, we will expunge the record within 30 days after the non-sustained finding is made?
I'm not sure. The bill does not speak to that, but of course, the goal is to not have departments, as something that happened in New York City, New York State, when this happened, when this law passed, to have agencies go and just expunge all records before the law comes into effect. That would not be the goal. We want to make sure we protect against that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. So, I mean, we should be, just for like full disclosure, transparency, I mean, like that, the expungement piece for these records, I mean, we're still in another piece of legislation where we are entertaining that, right? I mean, we're still talking about that. That's still a conversation that we've got going on with the with LEOVR and some other pieces of legislation. So the expungement piece still to be determined on that. I mean, but Senator Carter is absolutely correct. I think it's 3 years, right? 3 years, please unsustained. Okay, Senator West, I think your hand was up before, so go to you now. Oh, you're good to go. Senator Bailey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Couple questions, and I wanted to sort of talk about this when we're talking about the retention schedule for complaints. I know the agency that I came from, we were also under a consent decree. Part of that decree required that all internal files be purged at 5 years. Didn't matter what was in your file, sustained, non-sustained, founded, unfounded. Everything at 5 years had to be purged. I wonder how does this proposed legislation affect that?
This bill doesn't affect that.
So they would still be.
This bill doesn't speak to that issue.
So they would still be the case law that consent decree would still say that at 5 years they were all completely purged.
I mean, if that's the policy of the agency, I think I don't know that.
It's not the policy of the agency. It's case law.
Well, this wouldn't change that.
Okay. Now, this is one thing that I'm not 100% sure of. What other public employees other than police are required to have alleged complaints? They keep the alleged complaints against them?
I'm not sure. I don't know if anybody else or Jamie knows, but I don't think that it is something that's common with other public employees. I do think that the rationale justification for it to be with law enforcement is because they are public servants, and because they uniquely have the ability to, as we've seen, use excessive force on people, even resulting in their death. And so the impetus for this bill comes largely from that great latitude that we give law enforcement officers, and the fact that we have not done a good enough job in the state of Maryland weeding out those problem officers. So this is a tool that we can now use to help us do so.
So if we could just maybe stick to the question I I would appreciate it. The question is, when we deal with other people and elected officials, how does that work with retention schedule for alleged complaints against them?
So I don't think this bill talks about retention schedule for any police or any other public employee.
I know, but it's very important that when we're establishing standards, we establish some standard that is fair to everyone, right? And we should, I just think that it's important that if you have an alleged complaint against you, if I have one, I don't know what this is. If I have an alleged complaint against myself as a legislator, is that alleged complaint open for a PIO request?
I don't think so under the bill. First of all, under the bill, no.
Well, this is not.
This bill doesn't address other, this bill is specifically about law enforcement officers. It's not about other public employees.
Well, that's exactly right. But we want to find out that we're not trying to create some standard for law enforcement that is unrealistic. So let's jump off of there for a minute and go to criminal standards when we talk about court. Obviously, you're familiar with Brady and Giglio requirements when it comes to a criminal prosecution.
Yes.
Right. So we know that anything that would involve under discovery, anything that would involve the possible prosecution of that case by an officer's potential misconduct would already have to be released to the defense.
If that's a question, in some cases, yes, it's released to the defense. And if it's not, then they can argue to the court to try to have what they feel they need released.
Right. So I just was trying to get to the fact that is a standard that already exists, that if there's been any issues with that officer, that they disclose that, right? That's the whole impetus for if an officer is ever lying or he is not credible, they lose their job. The fact—
Not always. It's not always the case that an officer that lies or is not credible loses his or her job. That's just not the case.
So I'm not familiar with that. I know the agencies that I've worked with, pretty standard, right? You can't have your job if you can't testify in court. That's a fact. So the other question is, when we talk about these complaints, and in today's day and age, especially alleged complaints, I was wondering if you thought at all about when we talk about our college police, that work on campuses, if this is the case and a college police officer happens to break up a party, and that all those people file a complaint against that officer because they didn't like the fact that that party got broken up, right? It's going to be an enormous number of complaints that are filed against that one person, and all they were trying to do was respond and do their job. And all of those complaints could be absolutely unfounded, right? But they're all going to be able to be disclosed.
Well, actually, I don't think that hurts.
Defense attorney, and then as a defense attorney, you'd be able to stand up and say, well, look, here's 150 complaints against this officer right here. Now they're all unsustained. Because they're unsustained, right? Well, you know what? That police department must be corrupt because they didn't sustain a single one of these. And there was 150 of them. That's obviously that's your job when you get to court as a defense attorney. But I really do question the fact of being able to give a unfounded or unsustained complaint. You're going to have the same thing when in policing, and I'm not just that familiar with how much you understand whether you have reactive policing or you have proactive policing. Reactive, an incident happens and you respond to it. You get there. Proactive, you are driving down the highway or walking the beat, whatever you're doing, and you see something that looks out of place. you go over and deal with it. If every complaint and every time you talk to somebody, they're going to say, you know what, I didn't like the fact that that person talked to me that way, is a complaint that's going to come up in your file or be used against you. I just don't think that is fair, and that's setting up a standard for police that no one else has to be held to. It's a standard completely different than everyone else. I don't.
Police,
This
to the
doesn't
extent that
exist for
police,
doctors, nurses, anything.
to the extent that police are able to kill people and wield force to an excessive way on people, that is why they are different, and that is why there should be a difference with regard to their records or allegations against them. A couple of things I want to address with what you said. One, if it is a matter of litigation, then the court will conduct a balancing test. Generally, prior bad acts, especially those that have not been confirmed, are not even allowable. A judge is going to do a balancing test and determine whether this is more probative or prejudicial. But in addition to that, it is actually can be in order to the benefit of an officer that has complaints that are unsustained, to show that, hey, these false allegations were made, but it was never sustained against me. So that's actually not a bad thing. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know if any one of us would not like the ability to say, hey, you know, these people were out to get me, trying to say that I was a bad person, but look, you know, I was not guilty, I was not sustained. I mean, I do not personally see the harm in allowing that kind of disclosure. In addition, a final thing is under the bill, this bill specifically prohibits the disclosure of records that could possibly impact an ongoing case or investigation. So I don't think that it's the free-for-all that you allege in your question.
My question is, Senator, you said you don't believe or you don't think this would, have you ever worked as a police officer?
No, I've never hurt anyone or killed anybody there.
Well, obviously, we see your motivation. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to prevent that.
Thank you, Senator Bailey. Actually, I'll keep you unmuted because, you know, I'll look around the room first with questions because I wanted to get your opinion on something. Seeing no questions now. So I'm doing some research on the bill. Like I thank Senator Hart for bringing it, but I was looking around the country to see what the other states have been doing, and not because I wanted to plug their statute into ours. Like I'm sensitive to Senator Cash's concerns. I think he brings valid concerns. You try to plug language from other states into our statute, but more just for like kind of what is the ground truth after you implement something like this? And I wanted to get your opinion, and I'll ask Senator Jackson this as well. But so New York, for instance, and this will lead into a more actual technical discussion with an amendment that I've got. But in New York, they mandated these types of this disclosure just this past year or two. I mean, this past session, I think 2 legislative sessions ago, or this past legislative session. And for sustained, unsustained, the whole thing, everything. And I'm wondering have you talked to anyone, any of your colleagues, across state lines to see what just like the ground truth is up there? What are people saying? Like I think you're unmuted. You are muted. Hold on. Get you on. Because I know legislators up there, but I don't know any law enforcement officers up there.
So I don't know when we deal directly. I know officers in other states, and different states have different requirements. The one thing that I would say is that Maryland's standard has always been that much higher than other states. Because of the fact, and this gets us back to some of the discussions we had last night about the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights. When that started in the 1970s, that bill was started because of the racial disparities that took place inside of police departments. It was created to say, we want to make sure that we are going to treat every officer the same. And we're going to treat them all the same when it comes to discipline inside. That's how this, and it has treated, and we have a lot of case law that's come along, and it has been improved. And then things changed with LAOBR. Now you have some agencies inside of Maryland that have collective bargaining, that have different rights than than everybody else that doesn't have the collective bargaining, whether it be in their municipality or in their agency, but some have different. But the thing is, and I think this is so important when we discuss unsustained or unfounded complaints. If everyone knew how a defense attorney would use information, I think that clearly, if you had 100 unfounded complaints that somebody brought in a huge stack of papers and threw them down on the desk and said, "Here it is," right? This is what. These are the complaints against this person. And they're going to say, and that police department right there, they were corrupt because they didn't find one of them. We don't do that for other employees. We clearly do not do that for our teachers, right? Our teachers who deal with the most vulnerable people we have, our children, on a day-to-day basis, if they get a complaint about what they do in the classroom and about how they act, do we keep that and do we use that against them? We don't. We don't do that if it's not founded. This is a severe overreach, in my opinion. I appreciate you asking me that.
No, I appreciate it, because I know that it's kind of anecdotal, but because the other states that have implemented similar measures that we're considering, and then New York being, I guess, one of the most recent ones. I wonder if there was evidence of morale or people not signing up, or lack of academy attendance and things like that. I guess that would be. I know that's kind of anecdotal, but I do want to get back to the bill. I'll let you respond, but I'll get back to the substance of the bill, because I want to make sure we walk through how the disclosure process would work under this bill and how that actually works with custodians of records and so forth. So,
well, if you look at some of the states that have moved in this direction right now, look at the signing bonuses that they're trying to implement right now, and the monetary crisis that's causing their state because they have no one trying to become police officers, right? Because and what's going to happen? We should just talk to the reality of this, and we'll run back to this reactive policing or proactive policing. Why in the world am I going to get out of my car and walk over and interject myself into a situation that somebody does not have my back? Right? You were in the military. The police are a very quasi-military organization. You know that you move as a team, you work as a team, you never leave anyone behind. When you go into a situation, you know that somebody has your back. You're willing to say, this is my community. I'm willing to put myself out on a limb and go talk to this person, whether he be dealing drugs, whether he be doing whatever. Right? That's proactive. That comes back to having a police officer in the community policing. It's what we set so many standards, and how we said, we want police in our community. We want them functioning as a member of our society. And now all of a sudden we're saying, wait a minute. We're going to use anytime somebody didn't like what you said or how you presented yourself. Right? You walked up to me and you bladed to me, right? And when you addressed me, you were aggressive because you had a gun and you had on a uniform. I was intimidated by the way you talked to me. That whole standard and that line of reasoning is going to take proactive policing and put it in the back seat. This is going to create a larger form of lawlessness across our state than what we have right now.
Certainly appreciate your perspective, and obviously it's invaluable having your perspective on board. I mean, look, I wanted to ask the question because I do think that the other states haven't gone forward with this. It could be instructive for us here in terms of the ranks, academy graduates, enrollment, all those things. So I think that's important for us to look at. New York obviously being the most recent, but then into your other issue about the use of kind of these other wrongs or prior other crimes, being used in court. As Senator Carter talks about, we have the rules of evidence that prevent that type of information from coming in absent a balancing test. There are exceptions, but we've got rules of evidence that govern that process and keep that type of information out. So, I think that's something to keep in mind as well for the committee. But Senator Huff, I was going to talk about an amendment that I had that I wanted to talk, but you can go ahead first, and then we can get back onto the bill. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I was going to say, as far as what other states are doing, just in general, to talk about the climate right now. The idea that if we take unfounded allegations and put those out there, when you have social media, when you've got this cancel culture idea, when you've got protests happening at people's houses now, when it's popular to protest people eating at restaurants, when you've got well-funded and well-organized groups like the ACLU that have very active press departments, the fact that there's no doubt in my mind, if we give this information over to David Roca and these people, they will destroy individuals' lives. They will use social media. They will protest at their house. They will find reporters to go after these people, all on unfunded allegations. So of course, any police officer in their right mind will know what they're against. So, I just think we have done so much over these years to deal with allegations that were made against people, criminal charges and such on regular citizens. The fact that the idea would be completely naive to think if we open this PIA up, that it's not going to be weaponized by people who have an agenda to destroy people. It absolutely is going to be. And with social media and what's going on in this culture, it would be completely naive otherwise. And if we don't, at a minimum, take up the Chief's amendments on this, I think that was reasonable. But to keep going round and round on this, if the committee wants to put this out, that's their decision. But I would at least hope we take the Chief's amendments on this bill, because otherwise, of course, it's going to have a terrible. You just look at our society and see what's going on to know how it's going to be used, weaponized, and destroy people.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Huff. Senator Sidnor, I saw your hand up. There you go.
It was up, but then I'm just thinking about the floor debate last week on the bill where I attempted to protect juveniles' confidentiality records until a time when it was determined whether or not they were going to be treated as adults, and got so much pushback from the minority caucus. And now some of the arguments that I was making is in terms of protecting those juveniles, they're making them, and in this case, it's just striking me in some kind of way. I also, because I have the misconduct database bill, these things are somewhat similar, not exactly the same, but somewhat similar. And what I've said to people and some of the officers that I've spoken to about the inclusion of the unsustained is that I don't think those who are pushing to keep that out they're not giving the public the credit that the public should have. If something is a ridiculous complaint with no facts to justify the complainant is found unsustained and all of the information is out there, I think the general public is smart enough to see that it should be rightfully unsustained, and they're not going to hold anything against that particular officer. And so I fully support what the senator is trying to do with the bill, and just wanted to make certain I said that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sidnor. Senator Castley.
Thank Thank you. I just want to clarify that the the opposition to hiding juveniles charged with very violent offenses, which is all we were talking about this past week on the juvenile bill. These are people that are overwhelmingly juvenile records, are not subject to disclosure. All the stuff that we're talking about for police officers would not be disclosable if they were juveniles. And all of the stuff that we're talking about disclosing for the officers, there's no one's disputing that an officer charged with a criminal offense should be public. That if it's we also, I think everybody agrees that even an administrative charge that involved use of force should be made public, whether the officer was exonerated and found, no, that should all be disclosed too, and promptly. So to sort of suggest that this is on parity with hiding violent 17-year-olds attempted murder charges and pillaging of their neighborhoods with onslaughts of crime, to suggest that that's in any way on par with a request to disclose administrative infractions by a police officer, that's just not there. And I would ask that we, I've got an amendment in the file that is simply copies and the Chiefs and Serfs amendment. I know I look at the New York statute. I mean, it's got a lot of different pieces. It's not an absolute disclosure of everything. It's a little tough to read it because it kind of refers to some other laws that I'm not pulling up right now, but they also make the same distinction in part that the Chiefs and Serfs make about minor administrative infractions and the like. I think the piece of all this for us to wrestle with, I mean, it's the allegations of sexual misconduct probably becomes the most damaging, or allegations of untruthfulness that aren't sustained. And then how do you roll that back? Because I think Senator Huff is exactly right that kind of information, I mean, you're a police officer, you spend your whole day pissing people off. And a lot of those people have very strong incentives to attack back. And their best way to attack back is to fill the public record with allegations that these folks are evil people. If that, I know, for example, certain jurisdictions are proposing requiring the officers to live in the communities that they're policing. I mean, at least if you can leave that jurisdiction in the end of the evening and go home, but if you've got to live in that jurisdiction and you're a family person whose children are going to be attending the local public schools, while all their friends are reading about the allegations that mom and dad are soliciting sexual favors from everybody they give a ticket to lying to everybody that they see. I don't know. I mean, wow. You certainly couldn't be a family person in those jurisdictions, and to even suggest that people wouldn't misuse this system, I'm sorry, we ought not be that naive, because of course they will. We see this all the time. People become incredibly vindictive. They become vindictive in divorce proceedings, in criminal proceedings, and everything. It raises the level of vindictiveness in all of us. And don't think for a second people wouldn't misuse this. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Casso. And I'll send you the link to the part of the statute I'm talking about. It looks like you found it, though, the technical infraction language. That's the amendment, but we'll talk about it in a second. I'm going to give Senator Sidnor a second to respond, and then we'll go into the amendment. And then I want to get back on the bill for just the process, how it actually works in reality. So go ahead, Senator Sidnor.
Thank you. No, and is more of a question for clarification from the senator's comments. And I wanted to make certain I heard you correctly. So if there were complaints with regards to use of force, regardless of whether or not those complaints were unsustained or sustained, you're okay with putting that on the table?
Yeah, I think, if it's an allegation of, they touched me, they that kind of stuff, but certainly things of a level that we would think of as violent crime. If the allegation amounts to what would be clearly a crime of violence, then yeah, I have no problem with disclosing it. We would disclose it if it was a criminal charge, and just because the state's attorney elects not to prosecute doesn't mean that shouldn't be disclosed. If you're alleging a, again, a crime of violence, something that the fact pattern would be a crime of violence, I don't have any problem with disclosing that.
So the things that you don't want disclosed are things like uniform not being.
Well, I think we all agree that those
that type
don't need
of-
to be disclosed either. No, I think it's the middle ground. I think everybody here would agree we don't need to know about that Officer Jones' uniform wasn't right. He forgot to lock his car 5 times in a row, and other technical infractions. I don't think we're not really. I mean, the committee's not really debating that stuff, and I don't think we're really debating the serious physical, the stuff that the chiefs and sheriffs say should disclose. It's that middle ground stuff between where somebody just simply says, Officer Jones propositioned me. Yeah, he pulled me over for a parking ticket and he propositioned me. This stuff that's in the middle of the ground, just basic dishonesty stuff that was not sustained, where it can become very damaging, and the public interest is seriously in question. That how this furthers the legitimate public interest.
So I'm asking because, again, even with the complaint that Officer X propositioned me, it could be found to be been unsustained in one case, but then if there are a number of men, if Officer X is a woman, or if men, if Officer X, or women, if Officer X is a woman, you have a number of people who are saying this, again, if there's smoke, there may be some fire, so that it certainly would bring some cause or pause for people to at least take a look at. And I think that's the value in disclosing and having this type of information available. Again, if the public sees this and sees that it's a complaint that's not borne by the facts, I think the public should have enough sense that they're not going to believe it. And to your point about people abusing things, people abuse everything. So I don't think anyone who's arguing for the use or the sharing of this information is saying that it could not be abused. I mean, all systems are abused to some point, but I don't, again, think that that's the point of the senator's bill is to ferret out misconduct in police. And if the bulk of these complaints are unsustained and we still have the issues going on in policing that we do today, then it would make sense to me that you start looking at these things that have been hidden to see what we might find. With that, thank you, Mr.
Yeah, and I totally agree with your premise that we ought to be reviewing the police records, ought to be subject to review, because exactly for the reasons you state, that yeah, there was one unsustained finding, but you've had 10 unsustained findings by 10 different people who we find no connection to, that you're propositioning women as you pull them over for speeding tickets, or you're verbally abusive to people of a certain race or something, and these people don't have any connection to you. We can't find. At some point that starts adding up, and you're like, wait a second. Your point was very well taken, but is the solution to that simply to dump all this stuff in the public forum, or should we have there ought to be an auditing process. There ought to be a neutral and detached auditor who take all police records, in my opinion, your police files, and go through it and do these audits. And exactly what you're saying, every police officer's file probably ought to be reviewed by a neutral and detached auditor who's going to go through there and say, wait a second, let's hold on. We're going to change the rules for you, Junior, because this doesn't. I smell a rat here, and I don't have a problem with that. But should that process be done by the general public? Should we just open these files up? Because eventually you'll be able to audit our police officers from Beijing, because you can just sit and pull them up on the internet and see all the nasty stuff. And don't say it wouldn't happen, because we saw what happened on highly classified files of confidential information exchanged by U.S. federal government employees throughout the world is now on the internet. And I can tell you personally that people whose identity that I personally revealed, believing that it was to a top secret source, ended up on the internet. And, I still fear to this day that those people may be dead, and I don't know it because their names got out all over the entire globe. So don't think this stuff wouldn't end up publicized, because it will, and it won't stop in a particular jurisdiction. It's out there, and that can be very damaging. And in a day when we're all just learning exactly how damaging the public square can be because of the internet, we ought to have some hesitancy here. But I totally agree with you that there ought to be an auditing process, and that where there's smoke, there's fire. And yeah, maybe you didn't believe the first 3 people who said this guy was racist and vile in his approach, but at some point, this isn't looking too good for this guy. And maybe it's time for a sting operation, right? Maybe you set the guy up and do something. But I'm totally in favor of public auditors on anything that can look at this stuff, and who do go through the files and can then refer them out to the police for investigation, or their own investigative units, whatever. So thank you.
Thank you.
These are both really good points. I appreciate the dialogue. This is good. This is really, really good stuff. I'm going to go over to Senator West, and then look, I do want to, you understand the amendment. Senator Cassidy, gleamed over for the technical infraction, so you got that check there. But I do want to just talk about the process before we get out of here. It's 5 after 11. We've got floor at noon. I want to give people time to get some lunch, so we can break out of here a little early. But I want to make sure we at least hit on the bill, as Chairman Valerio used to say. I just want to get on that real quick before we get out of here for the session. So Senator West, floor is yours, and then Senator Hedelman, and then we'll go to Jamie Lancaster just to walk us through the process of disclosure. I think that's important as we're considering either full disclosure or a balancing act, because understanding how the process works and what the custodian of records has to do and what boxes they check for disclosure is important. So Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Something that Senators, I agree with you that last interchange was extremely helpful. Something that Senator Sidner said resonated with me, and then Senator Cassidy repeated the same thing, which is that people will say where there's smoke, there's fire. It's a human tendency, and that cuts strongly, in my view, against making everything public. On the other hand, it cuts in favor of making some of the stuff public. So I would hope that we could now stop talking about generalities and get down into specifics about what should be made public and what should not be made public. Thank you.
Excellent. And I think, and before we do that, we have to understand what the process looks like. So Senator Hedelman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I seem to recall in some of my research a while ago, and maybe this is a question for Jamie, that there were also, that we were tracking already sort of internally complaints of officers against one another. Does anyone, and maybe the sponsor of the bill knows that too, because that just has come up for me, that was a significant portion of some of the complaints. Does anyone know, or in their research of those reports? And the reason I'm bringing it up is because in the amendment, I think that somebody was talking about, they talked about committed to sexual assault involving a member of the public. And I'm just wondering if we should narrow it to a member of the public and whether it shouldn't just be broader than that. Because I remember this officer on officer incident, data collection. I'm getting blank stares. Does no one remember? Okay, I will see.
I'd be happy to look into the testimony this afternoon, but I'd imagine it's probably department by department how they would track those things internally.
Okay, maybe it was me looking at the Baltimore County Police Department, because I remember being struck by, that was a significant number, and I was sort of very surprised by that. So, okay, I will just see if I can track that down. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Hedelman. Senator West, go ahead, and then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator Hedelman and I think both attended the same, not the same day, but the same program in Baltimore County to talk about use of force. And I got the exact same information, which is that there are not a whole lot of complaints these days because of body cameras being filed against Baltimore County policemen by members of the public. There are more complaints being filed by fellow police officers against a police officer who's not complying with the rules in some respect, and that what complaints are being filed by the public tend to not be sustained, but the complaints filed by the police officers against one another indeed are sustained fairly frequently because they know what they're talking about, and they can authoritatively talk about what they saw, and then the investigator credits them with presenting accurate testimony, and they're frequently findings in those cases that the police officer warrants disciplinary action.
That came up with my conversation with some of the state's attorneys, and they said exactly the same thing. Okay, just so we can get into the bill on just page 3. So obviously we all understand what the bill does, pretty simple, straightforward, but what I think is less apparent is how this all works, and is it the same across the state? So if we go through under this bill and we make these records, they're no longer personnel records. There's like kind of, I've been saying it's a permissive disclosure. You file a request for information, and then the custodian of records, which is usually someone that resides within the department, will have to go through kind of a test, right? So if you look at page 3 on line 18 and 19, so a custodian may deny, and so these apply to a person in interest. So that's different from just kind of you or me filing separately, but these apply to a person of interest, and there are 7 criterion kind of listed out here. So Jamie, so then obviously a person that is not of interest or someone else, these would apply to that person, and then plus, we talked about the MPIA requirement that it would be in the public interest. So Jamie, can you just kind of flesh that out for us? And then I know that you've done some research and you've had some conversations with folks, and can you just give us what you've learned about what the process looks like when one of these requests come in?
Sure. So generally, the folks that I had spoken to who handled PIA requests had indicated that generally they look to the Public Information Act manual that's prepared by the Attorney General in determining whether or not a record is subject to disclosure. They look at the individual provisions of the Act and generally become familiar with those areas of PIA that typically apply to the situations that pertain to the records that they'd be disclosing. And that it isn't so much that there's a checklist, it's that they're making an analysis of what's in front of them and being asked to be disclosed, and whether or not the statute allows for it or requires it. So that's sort of the process that I was given by a couple of folks. And as far as the Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the subsection B of the bill that relates to persons in interest, and there are 7 reasons that a person in interest could be denied access to a record. And I think Mr. Roca mentioned this during the bill hearing, but the idea there was that with a person in interest under PIA, the person in interest actually has, this is somebody that the record is actually about, has a heightened interest in obtaining that record. So the discussion that was had during the bill hearing was that if a person in interest could be denied under those 7 bases, then any member of the public with a lower expectation or right to access those documents could also be denied for those reasons. But in folks that I spoke with in Baltimore City, they pointed out that essentially with the bill as it's drafted, you would also be looking to other areas of the Public Information Act to determine, and also other state and federal law that may prohibit disclosure of certain information to determine whether or not anywhere else in the law there is a bar or prohibition on disclosing that information.
So I guess the second question would be like, so what you're saying, I mean, I know that we've got some standardization with, the person of interest language, and then obviously the Attorney General puts together this MPIA guidance book that these folks are going to look to for guidance. Now that book has not only statutory references, but also the case law as well. So they sift through and then they make their judgments. Now my question then is, the follow-up question is, so who are these people? Are they attorneys? Are they kind of, what is the back? Who are they?
Right. So it's not actually required that a custodian of record or an official custodian of record be an attorney. In the statute, and I don't have it in front of me, but it actually defines the custodian of record in the statute. And I'll paraphrase. It's the person who has, custody of the record, but it doesn't have to be an attorney who makes that determination.
Now, if you make a non-permissible disclosure, if you release a record that should have been protected, what happens then?
So violating MPIA carries both civil liability in the form of actual damages, but it also can carry criminal liability as well.
Okay, so if you goof this up, you got civil and criminal penalties hanging over you potentially. Okay, Senator West, you had your hand up. Did you want to jump in? Okay, you're good. Okay. Okay, and now is there, so for across the state, to your knowledge, is there a standard kind of office or person position description for this custodian of records, or is it different, or is it?
No,
is it the same? Does it work the same in Baltimore City as it does in Montgomery County?
I think it varies by just the impression from the different folks that I talked with was that it could vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and even within departments. So the person in the Baltimore County State's Attorney's Office isn't going to be the same person as or necessarily meet the same job description as the person in the Baltimore City Zoning Department.
Okay, and then the last question I have is just like for this public interest umbrella that covers everything. What, so you're saying that they use the guidebook, the Attorney General's guidebook, maybe case law, statutory interpretation. What else are folks using to interpret this?
Well, if there are other federal laws that would prohibit disclosure of certain information, so HIPAA would be a big one, probably that most people are familiar with.
Okay, I mean, so, all right. Well, I think at least people have a slightly better understanding of how the process works. So as we move forward, if folks are preparing amendments, thinking about ideas, I guess we all have that in the back of our mind now. Looking around the room for further questions, comments. Senator Carter, go ahead, and then Senator West.
I just wanted to throw in that with respect to Baltimore City and the Baltimore Police Department and every city agency, everything is run through the city law department, and they help make the determination of what's disclosable or not.
Excellent. No, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that this isn't just a kind of a willy-nilly process, that there's a process and some significant penalties for messing it up. But.
And Senator Carter, if I could add on, I did speak with folks in Baltimore City in their law department, and they did indicate that along the lines of what you had just indicated, that they said that they're not involved in every disclosure, but for complicated disclosures, or if there's a question, they can and do serve as sort of that central point.
Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is billed as a work group. I don't know whether that means that we're not going to take any votes, but we've been talking about your amendment to this bill, which deals with the technical infractions. And if we are going to take votes in order to move us off the dime, I'd like to move that we adopt your amendment dealing with the technical infractions.
Excellent. So, hey, I would second that, but we can't vote now just because it's not in a voting session, and
Okay.
we can
It's
take
just a talking session.
No, yeah, it's
Gotcha.
just kind of fair enough, but we can do that when we convene on Thursday or Wednesday. So,
Okay.
but excellent. All right. Seeing no further comments and questions, I mean, definitely Jamie's here, so if you have other questions on this bill, definitely make sure to write in or get your amendments prepared for a voting session. Really appreciate, especially the dialogue between Senator Cassidy and Senator Sidnor. Thank you, Senator Carter, for bringing this to us, and we'll wrap a little early just to give folks some opportunity to get some lunch because we've got a long day. So thank you all very much, and I'll see you soon. Have a good one.